from Relationships and Astrology as we discuss the year ahead 2020 for relationships. I'm Armand Diaz.
And I'm Margaret Gray, and welcome everyone. Goodness, Armand, we're into a whole new decade. It's not just a new year, it's a whole new decade. So inevitably, everybody's going to be looking back on, what happened in the last decade. But more so, of course, we're looking towards the future. We're looking towards, 2020, what's in store for relationships? And mostly, how can we navigate the energies in the best interest of our relationships? Really, I think that's really what our focus is on. So sorry, I'm interrupting you there. I mean, you see, I'm so enthusiastic about the year ahead, but, it kind of starts with a bang, really, doesn't it? I mean, between January 10th and January 13th, we've got the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, the exact Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is a 22 Capricorn 45. And although we don't tend to use a lot of, astrology really when we're talking about these changes, it's very important that you do keep in mind this degree of 2245 Capricorn, because this is a point in the zodiac that we're going to return to again and again in 2020. So if you have something in either your natal chart or your composite chart that is at that degree or squaring it or opposing it, please note that these transits are going to be very personal to you in 2020.
Yeah, otherwise, what we're looking at here is a real shift in sort of social, political kind of energies, economic. And those affect relationships. They affect everything. They affect everything. It's a background kind of chord that's being struck on which other things are going to play out. But if you have something 22 degrees of particularly Capricorn, Cancer, Aries, or Libra, you're going to really be feeling it quite strongly. And if you have something 22 degrees of another sign, you're going to be feeling it as well. In those cases, it may be more personal to you. On the other hand, to be fair, you probably are already aware of what's going on because that 22 degrees has been activated by Pluto, or, beforehand. It's not a quiet degree.
So Armand, lots of people are kind of asking, so what does this mean, in terms of relationships? It's a conjunction, and you're all talking about, us as astrologers, we're talking about this new 30-year cycle. We're talking about the intensity of it. So what does this mean for relationships? And I guess my interpretation is that, there's major transformation going on. And by that, we mean that first there's the kind of, the phase when Pluto comes along to a degree in the zodiac to a point, it really does a lot of digging up of old debris. So we've all been going through this giant detox, and we're still really in the process of that. And when it's working alongside with Saturn, there's also Saturn is equally digging up, but also Saturn is trying to put in some new foundations. So that process is really going on at the same time in our relationship structures. And that includes relationships in terms of romantic relationships, family relationships, friendships, work relationships, really the whole gamut.
Oh, have we been in the midst of detox, or are we simply in the midst of toxicity? I would say that it depends what you're looking at. It depends where and how you're looking at it. I think that in a certain sense, we're just, wallowing in toxins. If you manage to detox, that's probably, that's down to each of us individually to pull that off. Otherwise, I think there's just a lot of toxins around.
But isn't that a stage in Pluto? I always think with Pluto transits, the first stage is, imagine the big diggers, they kind of come up and dig up. And when you're digging up, all the dirt, all the debris comes up, everything that's been hidden underneath comes up first. So I agree with you that we're still floating in some of that, but I think it is important that we also really make a concerted, conscious effort to clear. So in relationships, clear old relationship patterns that didn't serve you well, from past relationships, and even going back into past life relationships and into family relationship patterns. This is really a time to really consciously get, just clear it all out as much as you can, because if you don't clear it out, there's not going to be any room for anything new.
Well, that's what I meant. It entirely requires you to bring the effort to there to clear things out. It doesn't clear itself out. You don't just detox. You have toxins and you decide to get rid of them, and you do the work to get rid of them. Yeah.
And with Saturn, there's always hard work involved. I mean, we know that we have to really work at it. So, I mean, there's a lot that's going to be coming up. And, just to go through some of the important dates, what do you think are the key dates, Armand, in 2020 in terms of relationships?
Well, I would look to see when Venus, the planet of love and relationship, is connecting with that 22-degree point. That's the first thing that I'm looking at. And the other big exciting news for 2020, we get this every couple of years, is Venus retrogrades from May through June. We have that 40-day retrograde period, which I'm sure we'll talk about that when we get there. But those seem to me to be the real key dates in 2020.
I would agree with you. And also, some of the Mars connections are important because remember that Mars is our sexual energy, our drive, that desire nature that goes out. So when that also, is connected to that degree, the Saturn-Pluto degree, the 22 degrees Capricorn, we're going to feel it in our relationships and in our desire nature. So that's also something to look out for.
Oh, yes, it is. Yeah, Mars, yes, we have both Venus retrogrades and Mars retrograde. Those are two very important relationship planets. And yeah, there is a bit of a drag on there. Certainly, as soon as Venus goes retrograde, Mars starts to get into position to, as soon as Venus goes direct after her retrograde, Mars gets going. So starting out, I mean, early in the year, right, looking at February, the end of February, we have Venus getting into that position of aspecting Jupiter and Pluto, and right around Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, about the last week in February, going on to the first week in March. That's likely to be a very intense time for relationships, especially because Venus is going to be in Aries, right? And she's going to be opposite Juno, the partnership asteroid, which is going to be in Venus's home sign of Libra. So there's a lot of dynamics there, and I think that the dynamic that you get with Venus and Juno is what I want, Venus and Aries, and what I got, Juno and Libra. And although they sort of speak in the same language, I think that that might be a very, let's call that a turning point, tipping point for relationships.
I think throughout the whole year, because we're starting the year with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, there's also, the key note that is running through the year is really constantly doing reality checks, and you and I were talking about this a little earlier, Armand, that really there is this strong Saturnian energy, and Capricornian energy, which doesn't really allow us to get too lost in our fantasies, in our dreams. We've got to keep coming down to earth. And I think that's going to be throughout the year. So even though, we might want to get carried away with some wonderful romance, we really need to be quite discerning and to come back to brass tacks. So that's going to keep pulling us back throughout the year.
It's a year to be very realistic, but it's also a year when the stars are really not giving us much choice about it. It's not like last year we had a lot of stuff in Sagittarius and you could kind of, just take a leap of faith type of thing. This is much more serious kind of energy that is going to be much more realistic. Interestingly, though, we go through those those periods there when Venus is aspecting the Capricorn planets, and then she goes on March 8th, within the span of a couple of weeks here, this is all happening, to conjunct Uranus. And so we get this kind of, tensions build and then a kind of release type of energy.
Yes, and that could be, sudden changes. With Uranus coming along, there can be sudden changes in relationships. And also, that's a great point to let go of things, because with Uranus, we kind of like, oh, okay, I'm done with that. That's it. I can walk away. So keep note of those times if you're really kind of feeling stuck in a situation and kind of really feeling you can't let go. That's a release point. Another release point is March 20th. There's the Mars-Jupiter conjunction at the degree of the 22 Capricorn 45, which keep in mind that's the important degree. That gives you some expansion. There's the potential for some expansion with Jupiter. So these are important points to, if you get to the point where you think, oh my goodness, life is just hard work. It's like my relationships are really hard. These are points at which you might make some decision either to stay or not in a relationship, or maybe just the relationship opens up and gives, there's more potential in it.
I think we say this a lot. We should always say it, just to, so the universal disclaimer for all of this is, if your relationship is chugging along fine and everything is pretty good, it's unless you have something right at that degree and unless there's some underlying cause, these are not most of this stuff will go past without really making much of an impression on you. You might get a little edgy. You might be a little bit interested in, changing things up a little bit or something. It's for people who are really at a tipping point one way or the other. Are we going to go forward with the relationship? Or do I want to get out of this thing? It's when there's a question hanging in the balance that these energies really make an impression.
That's a very important point, Armand. I agree with you because it's easy to forget that. Now, just to go back to March, because the day after the Mars-Jupiter conjunction, March 21st, we have Saturn moving into Aquarius just for a period of time, from March to the end of June 2020. And then, it goes back at the end of the year as well. Now, this is very, very important because it marks a little bit of a big shift in the energies. We've had this density, this intensity, this kind of everything has to be serious, this go by the rules, boundaries, and so on. And now suddenly there's, new ideas, new possibilities in relationships, a new way of being in relationship. And mostly it mightn't feel as hard work, and not as much sacrifice and rules. At the moment, we're really bound. So for people who have family members who are needing caring a lot, I imagine this is quite a tough time because there's so much about, obligation and duty. And not that you don't love the person, but there's still a heaviness about it. This might be an opportunity for this to lighten up a little bit, just to say there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Could be. I think with all the Capricorn energy that is so prevalent during this year, there is a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of the sense of responsibility, and that does get heavy. And I think, the Aquarian energy could help that. The Aquarius, there's all different sides of the Aquarius. Saturn will not get up to the point of squaring Uranus, but there is a kind of bit of a relationship there, which, certainly it does suggest that we're getting to this point of, getting a little bit of fresh air, getting a little bit of openness in there. Now, I see as we go on, we get into May, we have Venus early May squares Neptune, and then Venus goes retrograde on May 13th, and she's retrograde for 40 days. The 40 days is so significant. She goes direct again on June 25th, and that is within 3 days of a Neptune station. So that whole thing about being realistic in 2020 really gets taken out for a ride when we have Venus retrograde stationing with a Neptune station going on. That's going to be quite a period of time.
And Venus is retrograde in Gemini, which is the light and the dark twins. So remember that it's a dual sign. So I think really that there could be an impact on relationships, really an opportunity on friendships, really an opportunity to review friendships, to review those connections, even connections with neighbors, with your community, really, and also with siblings. Very, very important in terms of siblings. So keep in mind that Venus retrograde is always that it's like a little bit of a time out, that it's a great time to just go back and really think, okay, what do I want to change?
Yes, I think that this retrograde period will have a lot of those emphases that you're talking about. The whole thing about, do you, go back with a former lover or something like that with Venus retrograde? It's also one of the possibilities. The fact that it's in Gemini should be really interesting too, because there is that light and dark, the positive, the negative, the this and the that, there could be an element when it comes to romantic things with Venus retrograde. There could be an element of choice with that happening in Gemini. And again, with so much connection between Venus and Neptune, because she will aspect Neptune again during the retrograde and then after, there's a little possibility for a little bit of illusion and fantasy and some of that in this otherwise down-to-earth Capricornian year.
While we're talking about retrogrades, I just wanted to mention the Mars retrograde from September to November, because it's in Aries, which of course being in Aries is going to directly impact me. So I'm very interested in this Mars, in Aries retrograde. I think this could be a time which could be a little frustrating, where we really kind of feel if we're trying to act purely from our will, like if we want something to be resolved in a relationship, or if we want a relationship to be a certain way, we're unlikely likely to get it. Our will may feel thwarted. So never a good time really with Mars retrograde, and particularly in Aries, to really initiate something very new in a relationship. Not advisable as a time to get married or to make a major commitment in a relationship, either Venus or Mars retrograde, if you haven't already planned it and if you can avoid it. So I think just to, just to be aware that that's kind of, again, a time to go maybe back and review, where did I take action in relationships in the past? What worked, what didn't?
Yeah, I think so. Classically, the thing with Mars retrograde, well, Venus retrograde, not a good time to start a new relationship. And with Mars retrograde, not a good time to begin a new sexual relationship. And
Yes.
what happens with retrogrades, and you can see this with Mercury retrograde as well, is that there is almost a compulsion to do the thing that you sort of know that you shouldn't. Whenever Mercury goes retrograde, I start thinking about getting a new computer. Whenever, you always have this kind of, I want to get, that'd be a great book to read and all, and it doesn't quite work out. And the same thing happens with Venus and Mars retrograde. But it's important to note that although it's not the best time, there's often a strong motivation. The planets are actually closer to Earth. They're bright in the sky. You really feel their energy. It's just not a good time for pushing things forward. We'll give it a shot. See what happens.
It's a very good point. We're contrary creatures, aren't we? We kind of want to do what we can't do. So going towards the end of the year, then we're kind of into November, December. We've got, first of all, October 4th.
I don't think so, Margaret. Ooh, time out. T for time over here. You skipped right over August, late August, when Venus will be opposite. Venus will be in Cancer, be opposite Pluto and Jupiter and Saturn at the conjunction degree.
I guess I just wanted to ignore that one, hoping it would slide away. Tell us more about that, Armand.
What a Labor Day, if you're in the U.S., what a Labor Day weekend that is. Yeah, we're really coming in from about mid-August, but certainly the last week in August, first week in September. Venus, again, connecting with all of those planets, including Juno. And there is just a lot of energy there. Venus has been slowed down in her progress in the zodiac due to her retrograde, and so there's that real, okay, now we want to go forward, and we get to this time, and it's a whole concentration of energy. Venus in Cancer is going to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more traditionally oriented, as opposed to earlier in the year when she's in Aries, in that time in February, March. And so there's going to be this is a little bit more of a decision time, a little bit more of a practical decision time, I think.
Certainly sounds like a pretty intense time.
We'll see.
So now I can go back to November. I can finally end the year, because you can see, being in Aries, I'm in a hurry to get towards the end of the year, even though we haven't even started yet. You know what I kind of like about mid-November? Well, first of all, October, we've got Pluto stationing at that degree, 22 Capricorn, 45. Just to be aware, that could be a little bit of a volatile time. So to avoid maybe getting into arguments with people, to just be a little kind of gentle, with yourself and with others at that time. When Pluto stations, we kind of, this is a big energy that suddenly kind of tries to come to a stop. But by mid-November, which is really what I'm trying to get to, Venus is squaring the Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, again at the conjunction degree. Now, this, I think, is going to have a little bit of a different feel, because it is a Jupiter square. So even though it brings us back to that degree, I think this is much later. We've done a lot of the work at this stage. So my hope is that by then, we'll have a better sense of balance in our relationships, so that we're not going to really be thrown out of balance. Whereas early in the year, I think there's more a possibility that relationships might just feel a little not stable enough. By now, this might actually help us really assess, okay, what have I learned? Where am I at now? Where am I going forwards? So that by the time December comes, when Jupiter moves into Aquarius, then there's going to be a much bigger sense of expansion. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of looking forward to that. That really, I think with Aquarius, there's less drama, there's a bit more detachment. I think also, of course, on a grander scale, our whole collective sense of meaning is changing. So that's going to ripple down into, personal relationships.
Well, I have Saturn in Aquarius, so I have a slightly less optimistic view of the sign. I see also that there's a little potential for some rigidity of this is what I believe, and we're not. This is my principles, and we're not deviating from them. It can be a little bit cold that way, but yes, in general, it should be an improvement. So what we have this year, we have hot dates. There are, and I mean hot dates in the calendar, in late February, in late August, and in mid-November. Those are real tipping point types of times. We have Venus's retrograde in May and June, and we have Mars's retrograde from September through November. My sense of it is it very much what you're saying. We kind of jump forward with all of this energy in the year, and then we kind of get dragged back for a little while. So there's a lot happening, and it takes a while to process, and it's probably towards the end of the year that we get a sense of where things are. But hey, you know what? I'm not so crazy about the idea of looking forward to something that's a year away. I mean, you should try to enjoy the process as we go along.
And by the way, don't forget that we're in term 2 of our 1-year certificate course in relationship astrology, which is an online long distance learning course. Everybody is welcome to join. And we will be starting, term 1 again next September. So do look it up. It's a wonderful year to be doing a course in relationship astrology if you want to get more depth, more depthful understanding of your own relationships. And also if you are an astrologer and working with a lot of clients in relationships, and isn't that one of the main things that clients really come to us about is relationships? So
and you can do this stuff for yourself. Learn to do this stuff for yourself.
Exactly. Then you don't have to go
Yes.
consult an astrologer. Yeah. So wishing everyone a fabulous 2020.
Happy
Take
New
care,
Year.
Armand.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.